And greetings and welcome to the QCast. This is season 4, episode 17. And today on the QCast, I think I was trying to figure this out earlier today, but I believe this is like the first D3 coach that I met along the way in my D3 fandom. It was somewhere in the 90s. That's all I remember.
We're getting
But
old, Bob.
that's correct. We're both getting old. And
Yeah.
folks, this is Mike McGrath, the head men's basketball coach of the University of Chicago Maroons. And Mike, am I doing the math right that like between you being Pat's assistant and being the guy, have you been in Chicago like 30 years now? Is that right?
32 this year. Yeah.
Is that pretty crazy or what?
It is. And in a lot of ways for me, and even a conversation like this, Bob, now that you're kind of this internet Division III basketball star, I remember these conversations were more at a bar in Salem, Virginia, or before or after an Illinois Wesleyan Chicago game. And, it's just kind of evolved over time. And, you reflect back on it and you just see all the changes and how things have come about. And you realize during that period of time, you've been at the same place.
Amazing.
And, I tell people all the time, I'm really lucky to have landed at a place that's a home for me. And I'm even more lucky that I recognized it was a home for me.
Right.
I think there's a lot of people who, and I did for a while, you kind of wonder what else is out there. And then you realize how good you have it. And I did that. That was one thing I'll give myself credit for. I realized how good I had it here and just made it my own.
Absolutely. And I want to get into all of that. I want to get into, I think there's so many interesting things about the University of Chicago itself. And I want to get into recruiting. And I'd like to start though, Mike, with kind of your D3 story, because I really find that to be one of my favorite parts of doing all this is like the different paths into this world. And so you grew up in Bartlett and went to DePauw, which of course is a phenomenal Division III program. Take us through how did you get to be involved with things at DePauw, and then how did that lead to you wanting to get into coaching?
Yeah, and it's actually the other way around, Bob. So I thought I wanted to coach college basketball or coach basketball starting in about 7th or 8th grade.
That's awesome.
I had a mentor in my life at a young age who coached I went to a little grammar school on the east side of Elgin, and we had a guy who coached our basketball teams in 7th and 8th grade and taught our PE classes, and his name was Ed Sicer. And he was just a huge influence on me and made me fall in love with basketball, made me fall in love with competing. And, I always played, but he kind of brought it to a new level and got me thinking about coaching. The fun part about that story is Ed Sicer later became a priest and was the priest at my wife and I's wedding.
Wow.
So from a young age, I knew I wanted to coach and played high school basketball, was a good high school player, but had a limited, I could have been a JV guy at a good Division III program kind of thing, but I knew I wanted to coach. And honestly, I went to DePauw because I saw an avenue to become a college basketball coach.
Wow.
It was that, or go to Notre Dame or Northwestern and be a manager. And DePauw had a student assistant at the time. And the head coach was a guy named Royce Waltman, who had been the top assistant on Steve Alford's championship team with Bobby Knight at Indiana. And I thought I could go learn a lot from him and get engaged and get involved. And so I was a manager for 2 years at DePauw, and then I was a student assistant for 2 years at DePauw. And then that's kind of how I got into it. And at the time when I said I wanted to be a college basketball coach, I didn't envision being the college basketball coach at the University of Chicago. I thought Mike Krzyzewski's job looked pretty cool.
Right.
But as I got to DePauw, as I started learning there, as I started, gaining some experience and then translating that to coming to the University of Chicago, that's where I learned about Division III and how much I enjoyed that.
And you were part of some really great teams at DePauw during your 4 years there. I mean, thinking back to those days, and there were some powerhouse teams. Like what do you remember about kind of some of those special seasons that you were, right there up close and personal with?
Yeah, and there's two things there. One, it was a lot of fun. Part of what I love about being a college basketball coach or being a basketball coach, at different times of my life, I've been a part of a really, really successful basketball team with my best friends. And that's been such a great emotional joy that I try to get that back every year. That's what we're trying to do, is be a part of a great team with my best friends.
Right.
And we had that at DePauw. We lost in the national championship game my sophomore year to Rochester, who, as you know, is in the UAA, and I have to go there every year and see their banner hanging. And every year I get texts from my old teammate, the old teammates and the old assistant coaches. And, I don't think they follow many of my scores, but they always follow that one. And, so I still have relationships with those guys. They're still good friends. Playing for a national championship was an unbelievable experience. And, again, it also probably ties into part of why I decided Chicago was a home, is I feel like having a chance to win a national championship in Division III is kind of better than trying to just get into an NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
Division I.
Yeah.
And that's what so many people are just trying to do.
What was the connection? I can't remember. So folks will remember that Mike was an assistant for Pat Cunningham at Chicago, and Pat Cunningham is, and we need to talk about Pat. But Pat's on one of the all-time great Division III people that you'll ever be around. Like, just an awesome human being and a great person. How did you get from DePauw to being Pat's assistant? I can't remember if there was some step in between or if it was direct or what led to that.
So I graduated from DePauw in 92 and was trying to find a job, GA spot, whatever I could find. And honestly, the market for a student assistant from DePauw University wasn't that great. But I decided I wanted to make a run at it. So in my mind, I'd committed to volunteering somewhere. And doing that for a couple of years. And two things happened. One, I started my search closer to home. Being from Chicago, I was like, if I'm going to go work for free somewhere, and I didn't live at home, but having a safety net nearby probably made sense.
Right.
Versus volunteering in Seattle or something like that, different part of the country. Pat was friends with Royce Waltman, our coach. Pat had been an assistant at Illinois State for another night assistant. He worked for Donwall down there. And so there was a little bit of a connection there. And then there was also a connection because Pat was the head coach at Manchester, which was in our league at DePauw. So my senior year was Pat's first year at Chicago. I was graduating, couldn't find a job. Royce hooked me up with Pat. And I got a job as a high school librarian and volunteered here for 3 years. And that's kind of how I got into it.
That's amazing. And talk about Pat Cunningham a little bit. Those years where he was the head guy for the Maroons. Boy, a lot of great teams that you guys were part of there. What are the things that you took away from Pat as a coach? What are the things you learned from him? I know that's probably a really loaded question, but I'll just ask you.
There's a lot I could go there, but you hit the nail on the head. I mean, Pat's just a great person. And, it was funny when we first got to Chicago, most of the people in our league were beating us and we weren't very good and everybody loved Pat. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, sure. They love him now because they're beating us. What are they going to be like if we start winning? And ironically, Pat's such a good guy that when we did start winning, everybody liked him still.
Yeah.
And more than anything, what I learned from Pat, when I was at DePauw, the relationship between the head coaches in the Indiana League was very contentious. I think you've seen stretches like that in the CCIW.
Sure.
Like, you go to a high school basketball game and, the coach from one school is sitting up here in a corner and then another one's over here and then two are on the other side of the gym. And, they kind of nod at each other as they walk in and out of the gym, but won't talk to each other. And you were taught that that's what being competitive was. And then I got to Chicago, and that's not how Pat was. And I went to the Final Four for the first time with him my first year here. And I walked into a hotel lobby, and Pat's at a bar with 7 of the coaches in our league just telling stories and talking. And I was like, Coach, I asked him later in the day, I go, Coach, why do you hang out with those guys? Don't you? I mean, that's who we're competing against. Because that's the way I was taught. And he just said, Mike, those are the 7 guys who really understand the challenges I face in my job.
Wow.
And if we can't support one another, who's going to support us? And I thought that was an amazingly insightful lesson for a young coach. I've embraced that wholeheartedly, and it's just been terrific. It's made coaching better. The relationships that I have with my colleagues across the country is one of the great joys of what I do. And he taught me that you could do that. And I thought, and honestly, I mean, I think Ron Rose is awesome. I really like Ron. Every time I talk to him, and I think he enjoys me. I don't think we compete any less than Denny Bridges and Royce Waltman did, who didn't really enjoy one another, right?
Right.
Like,
right.
no, we're no less competitive than they were. We just
Right.
approach it a little differently.
And it's really well said, because I think that, when I think of Mike McGrath, I think of walking into Awful Arthur's in Roanoke, Virginia, Salem weekend, and you're there with 10 other Division III head coaches, most of which you directly compete with, hanging out, watching Division I games. And so that, that is very well said, is that you have lived that, like, as long as I've known you, as you've been the guy that has had great relationships within the D3 community, which I think is pretty cool. And it's kind of translated into fans like me. Is, I've prided myself into meeting a ton of people that I wouldn't have normally hung out with, if not for Division III basketball. So it's pretty cool. It's a pretty special little community. Wanted to ask you about the university itself. I think sometimes people look at these high academics and think that maybe they're all the same. They just lump them into a bucket. But I think that, like, University of Chicago is a dramatically different place than, say, like WashU in your league, or Rochester, or, if we go to, like, the NESCAC, Williams, or Amherst. Tell people about the University of Chicago.
Well, we have it's an amazing place, and I'm lucky to work here. And what we provide our student athletes in terms of educational opportunities and how that translates into their career is, there are a handful of people who can say they're at the same level as us. There's nobody that can say that they're better. And that's what we are. And there are challenges associated with that, but there's also benefits associated with that.
Right.
And we've kind of embraced the benefits. And there are things that we have to manage here, whether it's class schedules and working around those, and, career networking things that our guys are involved in. I mean, our guys get unbelievable jobs, and that takes time and effort in to get to those places. And there's some things where that probably makes, I mean, everybody always thinks about recruiting, right? But it's not just recruiting. It's because our pool is smaller in recruiting. But then once you get those kids, there are significant commitments that they have that come first. Right. And that probably makes it hard to become to maximize who you could be as a basketball team, as opposed to places where, and not in Division III, maybe, but other places where academics really takes a back seat. But that's who we are, and we love it. And the pros outweigh the cons, and we don't hesitate that way. And as time has gone on, Bob, and I think you've seen this, and this is true in higher education, when I talk to a prospective student, we used to overlap with kids with Illinois Wesleyan all the time, and that happens less now. And as things have gone on, higher education has just become so stratified, and there's just such a battle for so few students. You look at places like DePauw and Illinois Wesleyan and schools like that. I mean, enrollment for the entire student body is challenging, and it's something that we don't have that challenge, and that's a great thing, and it's got its pros and cons. But at the same time, it makes our recruits a little less needed. So.
For those that aren't totally familiar, University of Chicago is on the south side of Chicago, which I'm from the south side, a different neighborhood of the south side. It is one of the most impressive, beautiful campuses you'll ever see. The Ratner Center gosh, how long's the Ratner Center been around? Is that 20 years old now? What, how,
Almost 20, yeah.
that's it's an incredible facility. And so if you haven't been to a game or on campus there in Hyde Park, I'd encourage you to do it. So it's a different play. Recruiting, I mean, your pool is so defined, right? I mean, some kid can maybe get one question wrong on these tests. I don't know how this works, but I mean, you're in this pool where you can only get in the highest of the highest of the high academic kids. And then, oh, by the way, you need them to be able to play basketball too. So it's a national thing. Like that, just I don't know, without giving any trade secrets away.
No,
How do you go
I
about
got you.
recruiting? That seems really hard.
Well, it is, and there are pros and cons. And again, it's like which side of the coin do you look at? And I've always been a like, let's look at the positives. And that's something else I learned from Pat. Um, when I first came to Chicago, Coach Waltman told me, Mike, you're going to have to go in there and get a couple of years experience and get out of there. And I said, how come, Coach? He goes, 32 years later, thinking about this. I said, how come, Coach? He goes, I think it's going to be really hard to be successful there. It's really expensive. It's really hard to get kids in. It's in the city. That turns off some kids, and he was right. And you're right. The pool is small. We can't just recruit Illinois. We can't just recruit Chicago. We can't just recruit the Midwest. But on the flip side, so we have a hard time finding kids that fit our profile. But if a kid does fit our profile, there's not a lot of us.
Right.
So the recruiting process is really research, not sales.
Right.
Can we find a kid who wants this kind of education, who understands how that will impact the rest of their lives, appreciates that they're going to live in the city on a great campus, a beautiful campus, and are excited by that, and appreciate the resources that we have for a basketball program and what we put into that and what we can accomplish there. If you think about those three things, honestly, I'll get a list of the top 100 players in the state of Illinois. And let's say each one of those 100 players is at a bare minimum, a good Division III basketball player. Out of that 100, there's probably 2 that we can recruit.
Right. Yeah.
Academically.
Yeah.
Some of those kids would just as soon not go to school in a city or would just as soon not go to an elite academic institution because they just don't see the value of it versus a scholarship somewhere else. That's fine. But when we find that guy who wants that, there's fewer places for them to go.
Right.
And so it's a lot of digging and talking to those 2 kids in every state that fit the profile. And then once you find them, making sure they understand why it's a good fit.
Yeah, great points and great context for people that just don't have a lot of understanding of kind of how different the Division III landscape is across 410 men's basketball programs. So your team this year is off to a good start. You're 6-2. You're coming off that 2-0 trip out to Vermont where you beat Bowdoin and Middlebury. Sitting 6-2, I gotta believe you're feeling pretty good about where you are. I'm sure you'd like to have 1 or 2 of those back, but talk about where you feel like you are right now in the season.
Yeah, so we feel good about where we're at for sure. There's always a game or a half or a play that it never goes away, right? It just kind of lingers there. I think we've played pretty good basketball. 2 things that are interesting is our schedule probably hasn't been as challenging as it typically is. I think we've had some teams that I anticipated being really good that maybe are in a little bit of a rebuilding mode or not quite as good as where they were. So far, let me put it this way, it hasn't been the UAA yet.
Right.
So we've got a tougher road ahead, but I think we're playing good basketball. I think we're getting better all the time, and we haven't been healthy. Coming into the year, we had 7 guys that we had kind of targeted as we had a sense they were going to have significant roles for us. And one of those kids is out for the year. Another one hasn't played yet this year. And, the others all but 2 of the others have missed at least 2 to 3 weeks of practice. And so now we went out to New England. We won those NESCAC games. I thought we played well. We're feeling good about ourselves. We're in finals this week, so we don't do a lot. And
Right.
then we have all next week before we play Wheaton on the 16th. So we're not playing until Wheaton on the 16th. And so we feel like we have a chance here to kind of get healthy, get better as a basketball team, and kind of lead into a 3-game stretch of Wheaton at home, at Southwestern, at Trinity on a
Right.
Texas trip. That, you know, if we can continue to get better and play well in those games, which will all be very challenging, hopefully we're going into the UA with a little bit of momentum.
Yeah, your stretch right now that you mentioned, you've got Wheaton at home, and then the Southwestern Trinity. That's that tournament. Where is that? Is that at Trinity? Is it in San
No,
Antonio?
we're actually doing it a little bit different, Bob. I wanted to Trinity's hosting this year, but
Okay.
when I called up Connor and Jimmy, I said, I don't know that I want to spend 5 days in San Antonio. So we're actually going to go play Southwestern in Austin and spend 3 days there.
Okay.
And then we're going to go over to San Antonio and play Trinity there. So we can kind of experience both places.
Makes a ton of sense. Living in Dallas and being a Texas guy now, I can appreciate that strategy.
I appreciate it. People think I'm a dumbass for playing both teams on the road, but I probably am. But the kids will have a great experience, and you got to win on the road as it is.
And it's a great stretch. Wheaton, Southwestern, Trinity, and then I went and looked at the start of the UAA, which is WashU, Rochester, Emory. Now, uniquely, those are all at home to start, which means you're going to have a brutal stretch. They're all brutal stretches.
Yeah.
So you're in this stretch of the schedule where you're getting ready for the UAA. Trinity is a team that I just voted number 15 on my ballot. I think they're really, really good. So you've got some great programs and great teams this year that are coming up. You're going to get tested here, Coach. Correct?
Sure. Yeah, we're going to get a healthy Wheaton, is my guess. And Mike, Mike's off to a tough start, and he's been banged up, maybe even worse than we have. But I suspect, the CCIW is a 6-team tournament.
Yeah, 6.
Yeah, I suspect Mike's going to have them in that mix. And a matter of fact, I more than suspected. I would bet on it. And they'll probably start with our game that he'll be on that. Although they just beat Carroll last night, I think
they beat Carroll last night in Waukesha.
Yeah. But he'll probably get to us and be rolling by that point, and he'll beat Calvin the week before us, and then he'll come play us. Something like that, because Mike does a great job and it's a great program. So yeah, it's a tough stretch, but that's what it is, right?
Right.
And that's what the league is going to be. And you mentioned that opening stretch. Our league's interesting, Bob, in that every year a couple teams, just the nature of travel partners and the schedule, 3 at home and 5 of the first 7 at home happens once every, I think, 4 years.
Wow.
And then in other years, like last year, we had that on the back end.
Yeah.
We had 2 of the first 7 at home.
Right.
And, it's, I don't know if it's an advantage or a disadvantage. I'm kind of looking at it like we've got a younger team. We didn't have a great year last year. We're kind of getting better as everything goes along. And, having them at home first this year is probably good for us. I think if you're a little more established and you kind of know where you're going to be at, maybe having those road games at the front end is a little bit better.
I was thinking this morning, I don't know how many years ago this was, but I've never forgot you saying this to me. It was probably 15 years ago. I don't know, 12 years ago. You said, my dream is to start 5-6-5 guys. I remember you saying this to me. And like this year, when I was getting ready for the Chicago, Illinois Wesleyan game, I was like, okay, who's coach trotting out this year? You're darn near there this year. Now you've got more size than 6'5". This team is big. Like this Chicago team you're playing is extremely big, yet very skilled, and a ton of guys who can shoot the heck out of it. Just talk about a little bit the construction and the makeup of your team here, Mike.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I always wanted that kind of all 6'5" versatile lineup. And I said that, again, you mentioned it probably 15, 20 years ago.
Yep.
And if you look at college basketball, that's where it's gone.
Yep.
Now, one of the things that's happened as a result is, you think back when you and I started following Division III basketball at DePauw and Illinois Wesleyan and good programs in the Midwest. I mean, with the exception of Braxic, if you saw somebody who was 6'6", 6'7", that was a pretty good. I mean, we finished second in the country with a 6'4" center.
Right.
I mean, Brad Heckel was 6'4". What I think has happened is because as Division I has become this more small ball, spread the floor, more size is filtering down to our level.
Sure.
You know, you look at it right now, Wash U, us, and Illinois Wesleyan are all starting 6'9", 6'10" kids at center.
Yep.
I mean, 10 years ago, you wouldn't see one guy like that.
Right.
And now, so we're big, but I feel like everybody's bigger.
Yeah.
I went and watched Rochester play Hamilton when we were out east. They're both kind of starting that all 6'3" to 6'6", 6'7" lineup. That's become fairly common. What we've wanted to do and what originally drove me to say that is I think the game of basketball is most fun when people have diverse skills and abilities and talents and can kind of bring those together in a great way where everybody's involved. You know, so much of basketball has become this guy sets a ball screen and everybody else just stands around. You know, you got a big guy who screens and rebounds, 3 shooters who stand, and 1 guy who can dribbles come off the ball screen. And, you know, that's not how I was taught to play, and it's not what I enjoy. And to do that the best, like just like you guys, our 6'10" guy can shoot threes and he might be the best shooter on our team.
Yeah.
So if you can put 5 guys out there who can pass, catch, dribble, and shoot, that kind of versatile, multi-dimensional basketball route is attainable and a lot of fun. So that's what we're striving for when we do that.
You've got a team that a lot of these guys, most of these guys are coming back next year, just in terms of eligibility. Now, the one who won't has been a guy that's meant a lot to your program. Bryce Hopkins is your one grad guy that's at least that's in the rotation, I believe. He's been a really good player. 10.6 rebounds, 2 assists this year. Just talk a little bit about what Bryce Hopkins has meant to the Maroons.
Yeah, and I'm really glad Bryce decided to come back this year, because if you think about Bryce's 4-year college experience, it's been tough.
Yeah,
he had a really good freshman year. He and a kid at Case named Cole Frilling were probably the 2 best freshmen in our league his freshman year.
Yep.
And we had a nice team that year, and we did well, and we were kind of eager to move forward and get better and see if we could be at the top of the UA and in the tournament. And then, you know, his sophomore year is COVID and completely throws that out of whack. And then his junior year is kind of that weird post-COVID year. You know, we had 4 games where we were missing at least 5 guys because they tested positive. And I mean, I remember going, you know, we went and played Rochester with like guys who just had never been on the floor. But we had to play. Like we couldn't play those games of trying to like reschedule. And so we didn't have that was kind of a weird year. And then last year we kind of got off to a pretty good start. I know we'll probably talk about this in a little bit, but then after 9 games, I was gone.
Right.
And, you know, so his coach disappeared. I mean, that's a pretty strange 4-year run for someone. And Bryce is a rock star. I mean, he's an awesome kid. He's an awesome competitor. He's a really, really, really good basketball player. He's a really, really good leader. And I'm hopeful that by coming back and getting a master's, he's getting a master's in financial mathematics.
Oh, geez. I wouldn't be good at that.
It doesn't sound good, does it?
No, I want no part of it.
Yeah, it's gonna pay dividends for Bryce, and it was a good deal professionally and educationally, and I'm happy he's doing that. He found something valuable, let me put it that way. But to allow him to have another year with all these other guys having another year under their belt, ideally with less of the instability of the past 3 years,
right?
Hopeful that he can have just a great year with these other guys and walk out of here feeling good, because he deserves that.
Before I forget, I do want to ask you about last year. I can't remember what part of the season it was. It seems like it was early that all of a sudden the news came out that Coach McGrath was stepping away for the season due to some health issues. So I get asked every now and then, like, is Mike okay? And so I asked you before this,
Yeah.
before we recorded if I could ask you about this, and you said, okay, so what was going on last year, and are you doing well now?
So 2 years ago, I was having some mobility issues with my hip. It was just sore, and I knew something was off, and I was doing PT, and it just wasn't getting better. And I didn't know what it was, so I got an X-ray, and they decided that I needed to have a hip replacement surgery. And I was 52 years old at the time. It's pretty young. It's a genetic thing, maybe result of being on basketball courts as long as I have, and sports or whatever else that is. But they said they needed to do a hip replacement surgery. So I went in the next week and got it done. And the doctors and where medicine is at with something like that is really amazing. It's a 4 to 6 week recovery. I mean, you tear an ACL, it's worse.
Yeah.
Well, a hip replacement sounds awful. 5 weeks after I had my hip replaced, my wife and I and a bunch of friends were on a trip to Peru, and I was hiking up Machu Picchu.
Wow.
And like that's how quickly I got better, and I was doing great. And then I started experiencing some pain early that summer, and we didn't know what it was, and it took a long time to diagnose it. But it turned out finally, I guess it was about the start of the year, so early October, they diagnosed it as infected. And to treat an infection, they have to take the hip out, put in kind of this temporary thing that you can't put weight on. And, I had to give myself antibiotic IV shots 4 times a day. And then once the infection's gone, that's for 10 weeks. Once the infection's gone, then they go back in and put another hip in. So we figured that out at the end of September, early October, and they told me I could try to gut out the season. And so, here in the department, the university was really supportive. The team knew a lot of this. The staff knew a lot of it. And I tried to gut out the season. And then I spent a night in the ER in December where I just couldn't get rid of the pain. It was just, it was horrible. And at that point, we decided to shut me down and proceed with the surgery. So at that point, Brian, Joel, and Mike Maylott, our 2 assistants, kind of took over and really did a phenomenal job. I mean, that's a hard deal. And we lost a lot of close games.
Yeah.
And, if you look at our record, we were a much better team than that. I think at one point we lost 3 games in overtime, and we lost 6 games in the last minute.
Right.
And against as good a schedule as anybody was playing. And, we were 10 points away in some ways from being an NCAA tournament team.
Yep.
So it was a hard year. I'm good. Everything's great. I actually had the other hip done the end of this summer. That went smooth. 5 weeks later, I was fine. So it was just something that we had to deal with, and it was hard on the guys, and I feel bad for them, but that's behind us and we're moving forward.
That's great. That's great to hear. Great to hear you're feeling better. Wanted to ask you about a couple of your freshmen that I love. I feel like, Mike, that in this weird era we're in of the 5th year and the transfers, and feel like the programs that have very quietly been behind the scenes recruiting good freshmen every year, at some point that's going to pay off again. And I love your 2 guys that are in your rotation. I remember seeing on Twitter when Luke Smith committed, a 6'9" freshman from Richmond, Virginia. He's averaging 7 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. Let me first ask you about Luke Smith, because I always find it fascinating how recruiting works. And but this kid had a bunch of Division I interest. How did you get him? How did that all work out? Talk about Luke Smith a little bit.
Well, that was the research process, right? And the thing that we get to, Bob, and again, going back to the pros and cons about the University of Chicago, there's a lot of kids I can't recruit, but there's some kids I can recruit that only 10 schools in the country can recruit, and Luke was one of those.
Right.
Without what we offer academically, Luke wouldn't have turned down the 7 Division I offers that he had. And he was excited about what we offered basketball wise. So we saw Luke play in this research process. We followed up, we talked to him. He was intrigued from the beginning. He had a cousin who played volleyball here, and came and visited and loved it. And honestly, I don't know if everybody in the country outside of high Division I recruited him, I don't know that he wouldn't have ended up here anyway. It's just, this was the right place for him.
Right.
And we were lucky that that's the case. And we're really excited about Luke. He's done really well early. He's incredibly skilled.
Yeah.
He really understands how to play the game. He's physically got to develop a little bit and get stronger and bigger. He'll do that. He's having an impact for us now, and I think down the road, that will just keep happening. But I think you make a good point about high school recruiting versus the transfer thing. The transfer thing is a thing unto itself, and we're at a school where maybe we could have done that a little bit more, but I just kind of decided that's not the route we wanted to go.
Yeah.
And we've had a couple years, as has WashU, as has Emory, as had some other people in our league, where we've got 18, 19-year-olds playing against 23-year-olds.
Right.
But I kind of think when our 18, 19-year-olds become 23-year-olds, if they're the right ones, doing that for 4 years at the same place will make them really good.
Totally agree. I think, next year's the last year of the fifth year group. And I do think the landscape changes back after that. Your other freshman who's really, really impressive is Phillip Lawrence, who's a 6'2" kid from New York. I want to say that maybe he was part of an undefeated senior year of high school, and he was like an all-state guy or all-federation or whatever it was called. He's averaging 9 points, 2 rebounds, 3 assists. Where did Phillip Lawrence come from? What's the tie there? And talk about him a little bit.
Kind of the same thing. We saw him play over the summer at one of these 8 million events that we go to. And in our research process, we kind of came across his name and started chatting with him. He came on a visit and just had a great visit. He didn't have the connection that Luke had through his cousin playing volleyball. But if you ask Phil and his family to sit down and rattle off 20 schools that they might go to, we were one of them.
Right.
And there's 1,200 college basketball programs. I mean, there were, 1,190 or 1,180 that he was never going to go to.
Right.
We were on that short list immediately because of our academic stature. And one of the things about that short list is some of them are, Duke's one of them, Vanderbilt's one of them, Notre Dame's one of them, right? There's a lot of schools where there's a pretty big gap between what we're recruiting and what they're recruiting.
Right.
And then if the Ivies kind of, who were dealing with Phil a little bit and looking at him, decided like he wasn't a guy they really went all in on, now we're at the top of the list.
Right.
And he came and visited and loved it. And Phil's a really, really good basketball player. He's got a savviness to him. He understands how to play. Again, got to develop physically a little bit, but he's exceeded my expectations in his first year, and I couldn't be more excited about where that could go over the next couple of years.
Yeah, if you haven't watched Chicago play, I'd encourage everyone to watch the Maroons. In addition to being really big and deep and skilled, a couple freshmen that are fun to watch, and Phillip Lawrence and Luke Smith. Just a few more questions for you, Mike. I need to ask about the UAA. It's obviously always been one of the elite leagues in Division III. I feel like the last few years in particular, like last year was just nuts. And I think this year is more nuts when you look at 1 through 8, how deep and talented these programs are. I remember trying to sort out my ballot in the preseason and thinking like, holy crap, WashU's going to be great, and Emory's going to be great, and Case Western Reserve has 17 transfers, and they're going to be great, and just all the way down the line. Talk about the league and just historically and where it is like right now this season.
Yeah, so I think the year was 07-08 was what I thought was the best year of our league. And in that year, WashU won the national championship. They finished second in our league. We won it. WashU finished second, won the national championship. Brandeis was in the Elite Eight. Rochester was in the Sweet 16. And NYU might have finished fifth, might have had the most talented team in the league. They had a beast of a guy named Jason Boone back in the day, and good players around him. But at that time, Case, I think Carnegie was solid. Case and Emory weren't very good yet. They were solid, but I don't know if we're as top heavy as that year was. You're talking about 4 or 5 of the top 10 or 15 teams in the country, the way it played out. I don't know if we're there, but top to bottom, last year was as good a year as the league has had. And I think if you asked every coach in the league for their honest assessment, I'm pretty sure at least 7 of the 8 would say they're better this year than they were last year.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be a war all the way throughout. There's really, really good coaching in our league. There's really, really good players in our league. We have a lot of guys in our league who fall into that category, like Luke and Phil, who were Division I caliber players who,
Yep.
for whatever reason, ended up in our league. Because our league brings a lot to the table, and there's a lot of things that we offer, similar to what I talked about with the University of Chicago in particular before. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to lose a game and not be able to sleep at night. And I don't know if I'll call it fun then. This is why we do it, right? Like when we first got into the UAA, there was I think an 8-year stretch when we started getting good where either us or Wash finished first or second in the league.
Right.
And we had a bunch of games that we would win by 30 and 40 points. And I liked winning all those games, but having this kind of competition and being in a league like this is what it's all about.
Yeah, it's a great point. I always get in all these debates on Twitter because in the last couple of years I've consistently said that the UAA is the best league in the country because of the depth. It's not about who's 1 and 2. It's about how good 6, 7, and 8 are. And to your point, like last year, I remember watching all those games you mentioned where you guys lost like in the final seconds to teams that went on to be in the NCAA tournament. I mean, narrow losses. So the gap between, the bottom half of the league and the top half was so small night in and night out.
Bob, I'm not kidding. At one point, I think we were 7 points from second place.
I remember watching that. I feel like many of those were home games where like you had, I can't remember if it was Emory or like you had all these teams or like you were up in the final, 40 seconds or something. And so, again, the UAA this year, well, just your opinion. I'm not trying to get controversial here. I'm really not. But the thing with, some programs kind of going the route of the 5th-year guys in a heavy way, and you have not gone that route. I don't know. Has this created a weird dynamic in Division III with the teams that have all the 5th-year guys versus that? Just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's different. I mean, I think back to the days. I mean, didn't you guys play Rowan in the national championship the one year when they had
did? Well, in the national semi,
national semis when they had all the Prop 48 guys
yes.
that had another year. In my role with the National Association of Basketball Coaches, I've been involved in some conversations about these topics. And I was involved in talking to the NCAA about what we thought, not necessarily what I thought, but what we thought about these topics. And I'm glad these kids get a chance to play. They got a year ripped away from them, and I'm glad they get a chance.
Absolutely.
And I'm completely supportive of that. Did that benefit some people versus some others? Absolutely. Part of the reason why I didn't go down that transfer route is, it is literally impossible for a college senior to be accepted into our business school coming out of college. Like we won't even consider them.
Sure.
Other schools do have routes for that. And I think that's created some opportunities for them. We have other programs where Middlebury has none. They have a kid who spends his 5th year this year starting at Sacred Heart instead of Middlebury because they couldn't create an option for him. We have some. And then, Case and NYU have a lot of them.
Right.
I think Emory and Wash are kind of in our boat where it's there, but it's challenging.
Yeah.
Has that made our league better top to bottom? Without a doubt. I mean, there's a lot of really good basketball players who have kind of fallen into that transfer route. Is that a problem for me? Nah. There's going to be good players in our league no matter what. The teams are all going to be good. I don't think anybody's gotten an advantage. And, in Case is the most prominent example of a school that's brought in transfers and done really well because of it. Good for Todd. He figured out something that worked there and it helped them get better. But it's not about Case. It's about those kids, and it's about them being able to have a really good collegiate experience. And if it happens to be 1 year at Case versus a 5th year at Middlebury or wherever it might be, good for them.
Good points. And I'm the same
Maybe
way.
not good for me. Maybe not
Right,
good for
right,
me, but
right.
good for
Literally
them.
not good for you. But and
Yeah.
I'm the same way. I like the COVID year and the year after. Like those were horrible. I'm glad every kid that is able to play like a real 4 years. So I'm with you on that. It's created some dynamics that are like it is what it is. The last question that I'll ask if there's anything we missed, but when I had during Mike Shower's run as the head of the men's basketball committee, I remember him telling me the story here on the show about how like he got involved because once upon a time he was one of these guys that didn't know how things worked, and his team didn't get in or whatever it was, but he was the type that was kind of taking pot shots, my term, not his, kind of taking pot shots at the system. And he said that Mike McGrath at University of Chicago is the one who encouraged me to get on the RAC, the Regional Advisory Committee, and get involved and learn how the process worked, and to then see what you think. And he credits that to like him getting in there and eventually being the chair. Is that, I mean, you've been a strong advocate for things like the men's basketball committee, the NABC, being part of the RAC. I assume those are things that you've really enjoyed and take pride in.
Yeah, thanks, Bob, for asking that. And first of all, Mike's a great friend, and he's very generous to say that about me and put that praise on me. And I did encourage him. And what Mike doesn't say is how good he was at that stuff. Like it was very easy to encourage him to do that because he's a smart, talented, hardworking guy. And he made the national committee better. He's now on the board of the NABC with me, and he's making that group better. But beyond that, it goes back to what I talked about with Pat earlier. Like we get in a world where we get so insular and so into our world, and we lose perspective about what's best for the game and college basketball. And I enjoy engaging in that. And I have the time and energy to do so. And I've chosen to do so in part because, one of the things I love about the work with the NABC or the NCAA tournament is it's consistent. If I don't have a really good year, maybe one of my better players blows his ACL, or we just don't have a really good recruiting group, or we're just not if my team's not as good as I want them to be, I get a lot of professional satisfaction out of that all the time. I can kind of count on that, which is great. We are in a stage, Bob, where the announcement came out from the NCAA, and President Baker put out his kind of proposal for where Division I athletics and basketball could go. And I look at what Hartford did a couple of years ago. I mean, we are in a 5 to 10 year window where there's going to be a lot of dramatic change. And I think it really could be to the advantage of, and I don't want to be arrogant about this, but here's what I believe. We just went out to the NESCAC, and 3 UA teams played 3 NESCAC teams. And the Saturday night, Carnegie Mellon, Rochester, and our guys all went to dinner together.
I saw that on Twitter.
Yeah,
that was cool. Saw that.
It was really good. It was really good. And I looked at those kids, and they enjoy each other, and they enjoy spending time together. And young people in this world look at SEC football players like they're rock stars. And I think young people in the world should look at guys from Rochester and Carnegie Mellon and Chicago as if they're rock stars. And we may be in an era where we can make that happen a little bit more. And some of what you do with Division III basketball, taking it from a conversation among 10 guys at All Four Authors in Roanoke and expanding it, what Pat and Dave and Matt Snyder and some of these people have done. Like, it's interesting right now. We're in a stage where there's a budget surplus for Division III championships. And what we do with that, how we enhance that, where we could go is really exciting.
Yeah.
Because without getting away from what's great about what we are and what's unique and what's special about what we are, we could just enhance that story. We could tell that story better. We could tell that story to more people. Because it's really the college basketball that I fell in love with exists now. It existed back in the day when you'd watch a DePauw Notre Dame game as a South Chicago guy, right?
Yeah, Kelly Tripucka.
Oh, sure.
Barry Cummings, Mark Aguirre.
Yeah, Those were amazing games. And those guys were so passionate about Notre Dame and DePauw basketball. They weren't that worried about the NBA draft. They weren't that worried about NIL deals. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what it's evolved into. But what I loved exists here. And I think we can enhance that and grow that and send that out to the young Bob Coolmans and Mike McGraths of the world so more people enjoy that. And I'm eager to see if we can figure out how to do that over the next couple of years.
Yeah, really well said. Exciting opportunities and where things are at and where it could go. And I do feel like there's a stronger Division III community than ever before, and people that are kind of, passionate about this level of men's and women's basketball and want to help do things to grow it.
And what you said about Mike, and I think this is really important. Paranoia exists in athletics. So-and-so is giving out scholarships to basketball players,
Right.
hidden as financial aid. Anybody can get into that school. Everybody's got all these conspiracy theories about what other people are doing and why they're getting screwed. And if you dig into it, that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And that's what Mike figured out by getting involved. And I encourage more people to do that. One thing that's happening right now, Bob, you may be aware of, they're talking about this kind of computerized tournament selection program.
Pairwise.
Which is strictly growing out of this paranoia that 10 people in a room looking out for themselves and screwing everybody else.
Right.
And that does not happen. I've been in that room. I know dozens of people who've been in that room. It does not happen. If you're in that room and you try to take care of number one, everybody else in that room the rat gets smelled really quickly.
Right.
We don't need a computer to do that. That group's doing it really well. And having those people involved, we just need more people to trust that and know that.
I'm in the same boat as I hope that we don't go that route. I love where the committee's gone. I love the transparency coming from the committee.
Amen.
They have made it very clear. They've been willing to go on any random podcast that they're being asked to go on to talk about how it works. And then they executed exactly as they said they were going to back in November. Exactly. And so
exactly.
I hope we continue to trust that process. Mike, I really appreciate your time. Again, what you said, this is your 32nd year at Chicago. Yeah. Is that right? How many years is the head coach?
25.
25 years as the head coach. I think the wins are somewhere in the neighborhood of 326, if I'm doing the math right, which is unbelievable. 4 UAA titles. And, most importantly, you've just been someone you've been a Division III guy, right? You've been an advocate, a champion. So kudos to you. And I'll give you the last words for the QCast listeners, D3 fans, Maroons fans that are tuning in here today.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And, thanks for giving people a way to share their passions and what they do. And whether it's the University of Chicago, whether it's the UAA, whether it's Division III basketball in general, more than anything, our kids are pretty special kids, and they're worthy of being supported and, being championed. And the more people that are out there that want to do it, I encourage you to go out, find your local gym, go see the teams play, the kids are so accessible. I mean, you can talk to these guys, you can get to know them, and
yeah,
it's a wonderful thing. And I encourage everybody to do that.
Really well said. Appreciate that, folks. That's Mike McGrath, the head men's basketball coach of the University of Chicago Maroons. Check them out. They're going to be playing Wheaton on December 16th at the Ratner Center. That was season 4, episode 17. My friend, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know you're busy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.